Hey guys, good morning. I am fortunate enough to be with Ted Van Horne today. Good morning, Ted. How are you?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Good. Thanks for being here. So Ted is the Chief Operating Officer for Global Medical Response. I obviously wanted to bring him on to talk about leadership. Ted, kind of the name of the game. So I just want to start out for those who maybe don't know you, if you'll share a little bit about yourself and your story and how you got to where you are today, if you don't mind.
Well, thanks for having me. It's great to see everybody and talk to people about, I think, EMS and how I became a leader myself. And, my background started at a couple head injuries all at the same time. And ambulances were taking me to the hospital. And from that, I thought, well, how cool that is what you do is in EMS in college. So for me, it started in college, freshman year, actually, in 1988, 89. In school. So, from those events, it was a softball event, it was a little car accident, and it was a hockey puck, all within a 3-month window.
Oh my
I
gosh.
came back from college for the Christmas, and my mom's like, "What are you doing in school?" And I had just joined up with the ambulance squad there, Rochester Institute of Technology ambulance. And there you didn't even have to have an EMT, you just had to have a CPR card. So I got my CPR, and then you just start working for the school ambulance. And that's how I got started with it. And it was a club event, but it was pretty serious. And within the first few weeks of driving the ambulance, we unfortunately had a cardiac arrest with one of the teachers in the dorms, or in the administrative buildings, right in the middle of the day. And we weren't able to save him. But that moment, doing everything we can, it was me, and at the time it was Dave Van Epps, who was the chief of the ambulance. So I'm the new guy with Dave Van Epps, who is the chief of operations, running this cardiac arrest. And I remember driving to Strong Hospital in Rochester, going crazy fast. He's trying to do CPR. I'm trying to figure out on the radio how to rendezvous with ALS from Henrietta Ambulance. And I remember an IV bag, I think, getting thrown from the back to the front, going, "Slow down. I can't keep doing CPR the way, you're going up River Road, because it's like a windy road to Strong."
Uh-huh.
We got to the hospital before we could intervene with ALS, and we did everything we could, but this is again in 1989. And I remember that moment afterwards going, wow, we did everything we could for those 20 minutes basically to save the professor. And from there, I think that kind of then really broadened out my career, realizing I love doing my industrial design and all that work. But in the end, it was EMS is what really hooked me. And, unfortunately, there's a lot of stories like that over those first few years for me. And it was, the passion of emergency services there and in college, and it was friends and family and everything else involved there.
Mm-hmm. Well, I laughed in the beginning, and I wasn't laughing at your misfortune about your head injuries, but I've heard a handful of people that start stories similarly, like they landed in it and just kind of stuck. I mean, my story's also similar. Fortunately not a head injury, but I'm sure your mom was.
And they were all minor. It was nothing. It was just, it was like a stitch here and, stitch there. But, and I would hear the sirens of the ambulance squad in college responding around that fall quarter. And then another, Tom was a friend of mine in the dorm, and he joined up with me, just because it was something. And it's the squad was small. It was only 30 or 35, EMTs, and EMT was the highest level there. There's no paramedics. It was just, an EMT squad and a CPR driver. And it was a club event, and as much as it was emergency services, and then as it grew, because it was only about 10 years old at the time, so it just kind of started going there at the college. So in Rochester is a pretty rural community when you get out into Henrietta. So it was, you had a 20-minute drive into the hospital. There was student health that was only open during the day. So you were providing, real EMS, and it was a big campus. So
Sure.
Unfortunately, we got to see a lot and over those years.
Right. Well, it's interesting. So you're on your first real call with the chief. You're the new guy trying to figure this stuff out. How do you transition from being the new guy trying to figure stuff out to, I know that leadership is for me and this is where I want to be. I want to make things better for the industry and organization you were in?
Yeah, the leadership for me progressed from really that call throughout all those 4 years at RIT. And it was really neat because you'd become the captain, and then you'd become in charge of procurement, and we're talking one ambulance here. So,
Sure.
But then, you end up we built this little technology, again, it's RIT. So we had this little command center of an old vehicle that we converted. And then we were able to start using that at air shows around Western New York in the summer. So we would have, we would go out to the different things and run command and control and bring the ambulance, because we were CON certified in New York, so we could do some standbys with the town. And over the years, I kind of progressed through multiple different parts of that on top of going to school. And at one point then I became chief of RIT ambulance. So I began running it, I think it was about my junior year, I think I became the chief of it. And then at that point, the ambulance caught fire. Boom. Burned up, because it was old. It was from the original, it was one of the original ambulances. So, but the school at that time didn't know if they wanted to keep the RIT ambulance up. And so all we had was that little technology. We called it the rat. I don't know why we called it the rat, but that was just what the rat. That was the and anybody that's going to watch this from back in the day will laugh, because there's a whole group of them that built it up, Kit Diebold and others that had, spent a lot of time, and Caleb Barlow, who works for IBM, who used to work for IBM, and, now he's off as the CEO of a big tech company, but, they designed that and built it up, and that's all we had to then run around campus. We didn't have the ambulance anymore. So in that leadership period, I had to do a whole ROI and prove to the school why we still needed that ambulance.
Right.
And I was able to actually merge the building and design of the ambulance with my industrial design background and the schemes. And I turned it in actually as a project, the interior design, and went out and, and purchased the ambulance that way in the school, and then got the ambulance back for that senior year. But they were, they were debating, do they disband it, just because what's the return on it? And then we had to prove our worth. We were having to run around campus with jump kits and this rat, and before we could get a Chevy Tahoe at the time to do the response. And it was, you had to learn to do that, the college dynamics and the financials of it, and then still keep the club going and the team going, the EMTs and the training. So that was a big part of that initial few years.
What an incredible experience to have during college. And you're in your design. So you're in essence, is that an engineering college?
Yeah, it's technology, it's engineering, and it's got all other kinds of pieces there. And I think one of the other big parts of RIT, which was amazing for me, was it was the second largest hearing impaired school in the U.S., National Technical Institute for the Deaf. So other than Gallaudet, and RIT and NTID is one of the largest. So when you're talking about having thousands of hearing impaired kids in the school ambulance, we actually designed the ambulance. It had little strobe lights in the back because they can't hear a backup alarm. Right. And the ambulance was stationed, our substation was in the hearing impaired dorm. So when you're sitting there coming back after a call and you're putting the ambulance in reverse, they can't hear you that you're backing up. So we had these strobe lights attached to the brake lights up above. So when it goes into reverse, it strobes. Right. And you had to learn basic sign language, and you had to learn, how to work with students like that. For a lot of times, those hearing impaired students, that's the first time they really were brought out of the house. A lot of them were homeschooled, and then they're going to college, or they're coming out of different high schools, and so it was very tough for them to adapt and move into a larger hearing school. So, as a medical, you'd have all kinds of calls, just as many your percentage. If your percentage is 20, 25% hearing impaired, you're going to have that number of calls, and how to be able to, know different sign language and know hospital and vomiting and nausea at the end, so you learn all those types of things and adapt. And it was something, but the whole work, all the employees or all the volunteers had to, do the same thing and learn the same way. And we had hearing impaired EMTs with special stethoscopes that had batteries. So they weren't deaf. They were just hearing impaired, but they could get their EMT license. Wow. And they would help us with sign language and all that. So it was fun. It was, learned a lot in those years for sure.
Oh, I'm sure. And so I guess maybe I can do rat. I learned the alphabet. I think, is that R and then A?
Yeah, R,
A, T.
And then T.
Yeah, I got rat. That's about the extent of what I can do in alphabet. So it sounds like you've got, all-in-one experience learning how to build a business case. So you've got the business side. I'm sure that kind of piqued your interest for your MBA later on. You've got really, I have a mobile healthcare, what's come to be known as more of a mobile healthcare dynamic deployment for your college. And you've got a culture, intercultural stuff. I think all of that, I don't believe anything is coincidence. I think everything happens for a reason. So I'm always interested to hear people's stories to know, where did that foundation start? So that's more than interesting to me. I'm sure it's been incremental for you as you've built this, conglomerate, might be the right word, that is GMR today. So you were had your college experience, finished up school there. How did you then land in Arizona?
So when I actually volunteered for a few years after college, I went to get my paramedic in Buffalo. So Rochester and Buffalo is I-90, and that's quite the little highway there. You had to go between the two. So a few of us were commuting between the two as we were EMTs to get our medic. And so we were working for Henrietta Ambulance, and we also started working at, I started working at National Ambulance in Rochester, which hadn't been purchased by Rural Metro yet. And there, George Heisel was the owner, who's still down in Palm Beach and is still a friend. And there's others there that meant a lot to me, both in Henrietta and at National Ambulance when I was getting my medic. And that's where I became a PIO. And I really started doing more volunteerism at the town, became one of the chiefs over at the town ambulance, which is a little larger than RIT, but it was at the same area, and then working part-time in the city. And in the city then, when I got my medic, you started seeing a whole different perspective of EMS. Inner city Rochester in the early 90s was pretty rough. And it was going itself through a transition, being a very industrial city with Bausch & Lomb and Kodak and other big industrial pieces there. So when I got my medic there, went full-time and then started working as a medic, and saw really a different side of EMS than what I had seen in college. Between the shootings and the stabbings and the cardiacs, the medicals, and you learn a lot and see a lot really fast there. So those years were, also kind of shaped me in what I realize, and I know what the crews right now, some things don't change to an EMS, right? Maybe the mask trousers are gone and you're no longer using Life Pack 10s, but we're on to 15s and the, Zoll MRXs, which is totally, all those are different than what I was dealing with in the 90s and what a traction splint is and those things. But, you still realize, the safety and how your partner is everything to you. And, you're working in that environment every day, and those become your closest friends, and some of them still are. And to me, that was a big moment. And then Rural Metro acquired National Ambulance, and George Heisel, who was one of my mentors there, was the owner, but I became the PIO, overseeing some of the media work. And then I got stuck on a highway during a snowstorm in 94 or 95 so it was a big snowstorm. I got sent on the mission with me and two other ambulance crews behind a yellow school bus, state troopers, and snowplows, going between Rochester and Buffalo, clearing I-90 from the snowstorm, and having to get on a backboard and basically toboggan down a hill to get to the person that's in their car trapped, and then we'd bring them up to the school bus. So we had about 20, 30 cars over the course of the evening. We had to rescue on the I-90 in between on I-90 there, and then bring it back. And I remember getting back to the office just frozen. And when you get snow down the back of your neck, and then you're in the ambulance and it's warmed up and it melts, and you get back outside when it's 2 degrees and it freezes again, it was hitting epic levels of like, what am I doing on the highway here in Rochester? And it'd been a few years, and that at that point, I just remember looking on the board, and they were looking for Rural Metro was looking for supervisors in Tucson, Arizona. And I had just met John Karolzak and some other executives over at Rural Metro from the leadership because of the PIO work. And then that's where I transferred basically, and packed up and moved to Arizona at that point. And so I went from the second cloudiest spot in America, which is Rochester, to the second sunniest, which is Tucson, Arizona. Now the first is Yuma. Yuma is number 1, but I went to number 2 at Tucson and was there and worked as a supervisor in different roles, and became the chief of EMS for Rural Metro there in Pima County over the years. And
never had to have icy, refrozen snow in the back of your neck again.
Yeah. Sorry, Terry's asking me what's going on.
Yeah.
So no, it was, that was it. But it was, it was tough because, you learned a lot, but also I think as a leader, and I think as people, you can't be afraid of moving and going to new places and trying new things, because EMS in the East Coast is totally different than EMS in the West Coast. And it's different than the South. Very quickly, I learned that what goes on in Henrietta, New York, or in Rochester, New York, or how EMS is in Buffalo is totally different than what goes on in Tucson. And Tucson's different than Phoenix. And I learned that really early on. And those people that work with me know I always, every EMS system is very local. And I do everything I can to not create an environment where it's just a one-stop shop of EMS, because that's not what communities need. Every community is different. And
right.
An organization of the size of GMR, 38,000 employees and 7,000 ambulances, it's a big ship that we have to keep that message going, and we keep trying and pushing that. But that is one of the reasons why, because when I got to Tucson, I saw how very different West Coast EMS is, with fire operations, with relationships with fire services, communities different, retirement communities different, all that type of environment.
Sure. Well, and I mean, you experienced that as a lot of the reasons, having done some of the, new market startup myself. You go into a new market, sometimes being a national organization is what gets you in the door. Others, it's what keeps you on the other side of the door. And being able to kind of customize those solutions, knowing you have things that are going to benefit you, like your, economies of scale and your all these things that are valuable, having the, being the FEMA contractor and having that network that is global medical response, from not just the ground, but the air, and the, the innovative solutions with a nurse triage, nurse navigation, and managed care. Having that full kind of umbrella in each of those pieces is a value to a lot of communities. But my experience, Ted, is most people don't understand EMS even in the community that they live in. And if you look at a place like DFW is a great example. Kind of like Buffalo and Rochester, 30 miles between the two, and they're worlds away from the model of the delivery of care in Dallas, and the relationships with the hospitals and the providers and even the payers. And what people need is different there than it is in Fort Worth, or is different than it's going to be in New Orleans, is different than Vegas, is different than Seattle, from a patient perspective. So being able to really identify those things and then capitalize on them in a way that's going to be what's best for the patient and the community is pretty powerful.
Yeah, and I had a friend who, one of the ones that Ed Cerrone, who I would go back and forth with Rochester, Buffalo on, and is medic and EMT, and worked with him for years. He ended up going into law enforcement, and it's another example that he adapted. And I saw this, he adapted when he went into law enforcement. He started doing, as a paramedic, things in law enforcement with the DWI, with working with the blood draws, and bringing a whole paramedical piece to the law enforcement, the sheriff's department out there in Monroe County. And, I saw him transition, going, there's other things you can do with EMS, because other systems, and that's what that county needed, was that type of support. Right. And I think that gets into mobile integrated healthcare. It gets into how other people, look at what paramedics can do in law enforcement and fire services and Homeland Security, and doing it in FEMA, and that you can be successful with those types of transitions. And you just have to be open-minded and be able to try new things and move to different areas and adapt as what the needs are for that local community.
Sure. And I know you've done a handful of things before you got to where you are. So you've mentioned public information officer.
It never ends.
Well, I appreciate your time. So thank you for being present. So you've done PIO work. You've obviously been in the back of a truck. You've run, supervisor leadership positions. You've also done marketing for my business development. I mean, as far as I can see, there's not a position you haven't kind of at least played in. Was that an intentional choice to be able to see different aspects of it, or did it just kind of happen that way?
No, I think there were leaders when I was at Rural Metro that they had a pretty good leadership training program, and they would move people around on purpose. And then when I came over to AMR, was in Tucson, started an ambulance company after I left Rural Metro for a couple of years, Arizona Ambulance. And that was along the border. And that, again, was that community in Douglas, Arizona, needed to have long distance critical care transport out of Sierra Vista, Douglas, Bisbee, Tombstone, Fort Huachuca, up to Tucson, simply because the stability of patients, not everybody could be flown, weather environments. And the need with the fire department was to partner with them and build out a model. So that's what that ambulance operation has been in business for 20 years. And Paul Peterson is the managing partner of it. Him and I started. He was my boss at Rural Metro, and when we both left, and that was exciting. But then when I transitioned over to AMR and I started running the 911 system in San Bernardino, leadership within GMR at the time of AMR had recognized, and that's where I then went into leadership track. Rolene Rhodes and Bill Sanger and others had developed a leadership course across the U.S. where leaders from everywhere, were brought in and try different things. And that's where I got pulled out of operations, put into business development. And it did expand. And again, it kind of reinforced the whole local and make sure you design and build programs, EMS systems for communities. I had focused a lot on Texas and Arkansas and some other areas in the central part of the U.S., even though I was living in California. So I was on a lot of airplanes. And kind of that's how I started, understanding what goes on here in the South and in Texas, a couple of years of that. And then that's when I moved to Texas and, in the leadership roles here and for, at the time, AMR in the southern part of the U.S.
Sure. So how do you take that forward? You've shared a lot of names, a lot of powerful people in the industry, a lot of really incredible mentors to you that have become friends and vice versa. I think I love to hear that stuff, but did you ever have one of those experiences with someone who maybe wasn't the best mentor or wasn't the best leader along your career? And how did you manage that? Have you taken anything from it as you lead today?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, because you have to recognize that, people sometimes they're well-intended, but they may be in the wrong box in what they believe is their best, sides of who they are as either a personality. And then you have people that are intentionally trying to sabotage, and you have that type of personality that you have to work on. Then you have people that have a phenomenal energy and phenomenal knowledge, but they maybe are in the wrong spot, and you need to direct them or put them in somewhere better where they can succeed and the organization can succeed. So I learned watching that as I think coming up, and there were certainly some people in how they were trying to maybe standardize things and make everything the same. And I saw that a lot in Arizona, and not necessarily adapting to what the local community's needs were. I think also you have to remember that in EMS, it's only one call at a time. So even though from an actual transport side, the GMR is 5 million patients a year that we're transporting, we're helping millions of others that we don't transport. Right. But we have to make sure as a team that one paramedic or that one flight nurse or that one pilot has everything they need to do that one call, one at a time. Because if that doesn't go well, then you've got, patient problems and everything else. So you have to build an organization that is doing everything for one at a time. And, sometimes leaders get into this and they get very global and just, they think it's, it can harmonize and centralize everything. That's not how it works. And you have to have a very dispersed team that has the same philosophy, that's driving for that environment. And, I think as I was progressed through those years out west, you could see that. And I think saw some of the dynamics and changes, quite honestly, of where Rural Metro ended up, and why when I was at AMR, became very competitive against Rural Metro at the time. And I was passionate, as that to try to bring the organizations together and then do a real big culture change, because I didn't like where that organization necessarily was headed, right? And it was and I witnessed that. It's one reason why I left Rural Metro. So and that's was a big, I think, again, shift for me. And I was in my early 30s at that time, and that was learned a lot from those experiences. And it's something when you lose a job and you leave a company, and then you sit back and go, okay, you got to take that for what it's worth, and then progress and do more and better, and learn from it.
Right. Absolutely. And so you took from that and the lessons learned from Rural Metro, and then 2015, if I'm dating it right, 2015, you were leading AMR, president and CEO at the time. AMR ended up acquiring Rural Metro. And so knowing that you had a challenge of a culture that you didn't necessarily immediately align with, how do you drive that change and that organizational structure, restructuring, all the things that come with an acquisition. How did you do that mindfully?
Well, Road Metro was in a tough spot. They'd gone through bankruptcy, and what their organization was, were they growing? Were they shrinking? What was their core passion? Lou Weitzman was the founder of Rural Metro in the really 40s and 50s. I mean, it was Rural Metro core fire operations has a long history, and that's what I kind of was in the early 90s, was that fire EMS, the yellow, green, fire trucks and ambulances, and that was that passion that they had, and they grew very fast across the U.S. And they didn't bring that core passion really, I think, across the rest of the U.S. and they didn't have that culture. So when we merged and did the acquisition, they were in a tough spot. So we kept the Rural Metro brand for fire operations, and that's what we use across the U.S. still in Knoxville and Oregon and in Phoenix. But you had to set that vision, and then we took the operations that were across the U.S. on the ground ambulance side, and either integrated them in, brought them in as AMR, brought them in as a local brand. To try to get that culture built a little bit fresh, because people in Ohio for Rural Metro really didn't have that core history, I think, of what the founding and what Rural Metro was about. So they had lost a lot of that culture because they had gone through a lot of leadership changes, private equity, bankruptcy, all these different restructures. It was tough for them. So, we had to then also find areas where unfortunately there's some areas where you couldn't be safe, but we go back and we look at Buffalo operations for Rural Metro, which was having so much trouble. They were constantly in the news, constantly late, on responses. It was a really tough operation. It was one of those that was really out there in the news, and brought in a new team, gave them a new vision, and just threw everything we possibly could at working with that community, redesigning the system, redesigning the deployment, and really working, again, one call up to make sure we do it right. And now, our team in Buffalo and the work we do with the mayor and the Earn While You Learn, that was one of the first places we did it. And we're really proud of it, which is where we hire students coming out of high school and that are really don't have the ability to go get an EMT. And they don't even can't get, have the community college. We go pay for all that, bring them in from these schools and these communities, and then you pay them to be an EMT, to go through class, part-time work as a VST, and then they get their EMT, and then you have them as a long employee, and you give it an opportunity to a student that didn't have it otherwise. And that group and that staffing, and hundreds of employees and people from the community we brought through. So it's been great. And that team had to get that culture and energy to do that. But we had to replicate that 40 different times across the U.S. Not every location, unfortunately, you can do it at the same time. And it's always hard because I know there's those areas that we unfortunately weren't able to turn around, or just sometimes it just didn't happen. And you do feel bad for that because you try to be successful every single chance you can, but in some of those cases it doesn't work. Either it's the community, or it's just management team or whatnot. It still has a dynamic there you can't resolve.
Right. So that program's called Earn While You Learn.
Right.
And
we're rolling that out. We have it in Vegas now. We've had in California, and so I think we're up to like 14 locations, and we're going to keep expanding that out right now, because it's a challenge for how do you get students and how do you get people into EMS, and that's a big difference between the East Coast and West Coast. I came in as a volunteer, so I had a passion and a drive because I wanted to do it once I got involved with it. Right. I think people do see that. But we all know, the pay isn't the greatest. People aren't doing it for the money. It's doing it because you have a passion. And, there's a lot of things at the national level we need to keep doing to try to drive and improve how we can get all those things improved and increased for EMS as an industry and as a profession. But, you look back at how long it took for nursing to happen, and, we keep, things that you're doing here with GEMS and you're doing with other leaders are doing to keep promoting and getting out there. And when you see all this stuff on TV with COVID, and you see the hundreds and hundreds of ambulances from all across the U.S. going in and do what they did at New York, people sitting back going, well, that was, something. And, that continued reinforcement to hopefully get people into the profession. And then the legislators and the regulators to know that, reimbursement is all flows, the Medicare reimbursement and, all that stuff has to happen so that we can keep getting the profession up. And, as a leader, I think that's what, we're all trying to do.
Right. Well, I mean, you have to have a program that feeds, head injury kids into leadership roles, Ted.
Right. Yeah.
How else will they find their passion?
Right.
So, and it's funny because I have a friend of mine actually has a very similar story in a foreign country. And she developed her career, very successful in the industry now. So she'll be on my podcast eventually. But, it's incredible because you do have to kind of plant that seed early. And you've been very successful in your career, having, great mentors along the way. Obviously, you've had an intentional practice of kind of paying attention to lessons and taking those and moving them forward. Knowing that's important, knowing that leadership is important. How do you, I don't know how many leaders you have that report directly to you, but you've got 38,000 employees plus that you're responsible for across 8 brands. Service models, national contracts, international division in Trinidad. One, how do you sleep at night or have any hair left at all?
Yeah. Great.
With that level of pressure and high stress, because I know that's something that being in the back of a truck and patient care people are accustomed to, but really starting to drive this industry toward having more conversations about resilience. Is that something that you struggle with at an executive level position?
Yeah, I think you have to manage your time is critical, right? You can't, there just simply isn't enough time in the day to get to everything. And that is tough because you do sometimes, the emails get overwhelming. Dogs are barking constantly, whatever the issue is, you're trying to do this environment from home. But it is, you have to adapt with it, right? Texting and recognizing that you surround yourself with as strong a team as you can, and they help filter. And if everybody keeps help filtering, you hopefully can make sure that as you have to build the team and work around one patient at a time, that you don't let that, go. But it is a lot about, time management, I think, and making sure you have a lot of time personal, with family. Now, one thing I know as a leader, people look at, you don't see me at a lot of the trades and the conferences, right? Doing a lot of the speeches and taking my weekends that way, because I made a conscious decision a few years ago that in this job, I am really Monday to Friday. And it is really hard on the weekends to be off and gone when I have 3 kids and a family. So, you see me during the week at the conferences, but I can't be there all weekends. And as you know, now with COVID, there's, no conferences really anyway, but during those environments, it's a lot. You could be going nonstop. And, Dr. Rock's been doing that. And I talk to Dr. Rock all the time. And I'm like, man, you went 3 weekends in a row. He's like, yeah, it's getting tough, but that's what he does great, time-wise for him. And he's a phenomenal advocate for the company. And,
right.
But that's an example where you have to make concessions to say, okay, my focus is on the employees, on the job, Monday to Friday, family time. And, weekends, really, I try to really keep weekends for me, and that's, helpful, but recognizing some weekends, it is disaster time. It's hurricanes, it's the earthquakes, or it's the wildfires, or COVID. Those things obviously still happen. So it is absolutely still 24/7.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that looks different for everybody. So I think, Dr. Rock is a great example. His passion is being in that space, and he is a motivator and he is inspirational. And so he gets fulfillment out of that, where
Right.
Not saying that you don't, but everybody's what gets fulfillment, it looks different. And so it's okay to say, and I'm hearing you say as, COO of a global organization, it's okay to set boundaries and to respect them for yourself, and to expect that other people respect those boundaries is important to your mental, your emotional, and a lot of times your physical state.
Right. And there'll be a time where that changes. And don't get me wrong. I mean, I've, loved doing when we do the big the strategy sessions and the hundreds of employees and the stars of life. And I love that stuff.
Yeah.
And there'll be a time in my career, I'm sure, where, when the kids are older and time is good, or, other things change, that I'll pivot more to that environment. I'm excited for that, even teaching more and all the experiences and how we do the disaster management, how we order, how the organization structures around that. So there's certainly a time for that. And that's the piece, you can't think you could do all things all the time and please everyone, because you can't, right? You have to make sure you're set yourself personally, and you have your boundaries and your guidelines. And then from that, you I think do the best you can to try to manage your time and all the things that come at you as a leader.
Mm-hmm. And I think, important to note that you're talking about phases and that being okay. No different than an ambulance company would go through, or a fire department would go through, or frankly, a municipality would go through, is that, there are stages and phases, and what works in this stage, in this phase, may not work tomorrow. We hear a lot this, I call them always and never people. You've got the always and never people who are, well, this is how we've always done it, or we tried that before and it didn't work. How do you, from a culture perspective and a leadership perspective, how do you manage that resistance to change the industry? Because I know we're in it now, right? We just had legislation that passed with COVID that's supporting telemedicine in a new space. We have unique models, not just community paramedicine. I know you guys have driven away from that to more of the nurse navigation piece, but how do you have those conversations and drive that change forward when you're meeting that clear resistance?
It's got to start initially at the top from a vision and strategy. So Randy Owens, the CEO of GMR, and he has a background. He came in through accounting, but also in vision healthcare as a CFO over there. So in that environment, the CEO comes out of the Envision healthcare space, which is that, physician model, and he was overseeing, the telehealth and all the pieces at Evolution Health for a little while. So when we have our strategy, he's keenly aware of, basically letting and knowing that GMR has got to go into that space. So from a strategic level, you've got all the senior leaders knowing we've got to be in that nurse nav space. Now we are making a conscious decision to pivot a little bit away from, the community-based model where the medics are on scene, treating and releasing, because the government isn't fully, we obviously want ET3, but right now during COVID, there was a clear message. We could have been there as paramedics.
Yes.
But decisions were made to get patients, I think, more through the filter of the hospital systems, because you have so much uncertainty. Right. It wasn't really probably the time to really test out all those things at a national level.
Right.
So we wanted to go really fast, and we had the nurse line already up, running DC's EMS systems live in Arlington, live in other big cities. And then we expanded that when the helicopters weren't flying as much. For our air programs, what do we have? We have 1,000 nurses. So we were able to rapidly take the nurse navigation line. The nurses that were working on their time off were not flying on the helicopters because COVID volume brought all the EMS systems, slowed them down. So we had all the nurse lines now doing all the COVID screening and the calls for employees. And then suddenly we started getting all these other contracts with FedEx and these other systems, so we can actually start adapting real time. And, once you have the senior leaders all knowing, go in that direction. And that's what we did, is not only doing the big missions with FEMA, but having the whole nurse navigation line system set up, and pivoting as an organization. And you have to do that, I think, with leadership around you that thinks strategically and isn't always, this is the way we've done it, or no, we can't. It's like, well, maybe we can. And, when you have the Dr. Rocks out there and now Jeff Beeson's on board, and we have other leaders that have been with us that are really that thought leader. Sven Johnson, who came out of Rural Metro, he's never been in EMS, but I'll tell you, he knows all the little pieces moving around between the payers and the technology systems. And when you put everybody in a room or online and you start talking strategy, it's amazing what comes out.
Right. Well, and pivot's a good word. And I think it's one of those that's going to become innovation in 2 years, right? Everybody's talking about how do you innovate until, kind of ad nauseum sometimes. But
it's important. We did that. It's what's Sven Johnson's job. We have an entire innovation department. That's all they do. And I think you've seen the drones flying around. You saw them at the trades, right? Where we've got the drone program. So we have an innovation group. Their job is to operationalize, get the programs up and operational. And once they're operational from the innovation team, then they pass over to ops to run. Right. So nurse navigation for the last year and a half was sitting over in the innovation team, getting the tech working, the training working, basically everything we need to make it run. You pilot it in innovation, then it goes over to the ops team, and now it's sitting over at operations, actually operating, executing, and the sales team is selling it and growing it. Right. So it's the size of the organization, you have to set that up. You can't, otherwise you can't get a pilot out. And another great example I use is the therapy dog program, the dogs, which are just, we love it. But that was Lauren and the Amarillo team deciding, let's get a couple dogs because we have issues in Amarillo and with how to help employees and that wellness group. Well, we're 20 dogs later now, right? And they took that great program with innovation, with the team, operationalized it, and now it's across the U.S. And we're going to keep putting more and more dollars. It's just one other way to help employees, right? And that was a great homegrown local team thought of it, support them on it, and do something phenomenal. And we know it's helped. If it helped just one employee, but we know it's helping more than that. And so it was all well worth it. But you got to incentivize and motivate those employees to be willing to come up with great ideas.
Right. Well, I think one of the biggest challenges in being innovative and being one of those people that's a dreamer, and I'll speak from personal experience, when you come to the table and you're excited, you're like, I've got this great idea and I've thought through it and here's my business plan and here's the ROI, and someone goes, yeah, well, that we've tried that, it's not going to work. It's deflating, and it's such a challenge, not only personally to your employees, but it becomes the culture. Because if my idea that was so great that I've well thought out wasn't pitched and received, why would yours be? And you start getting this very unhealthy culture of an us and them. And so I think it's incredible to hear you say, Ted, that you're listening. And I think that's the foundation of leadership, is you've got to hear your people and really truly listen, and then take those challenges from the patient experience and the customer satisfaction and the hospital, HCAP scores, or whatever they're being measured on, whatever your customer is asking for, really hear it. And then you can successfully pivot your business and continue to be innovative. And it sounds like you guys have done that phenomenally.
Well, we're trying, and the diversity and the issues in America right now really requires all leaders to listen more. And in the last 3-4 weeks, we've been doing calls across the U.S. with employees. We wanted to get face-to-face with them, but because of COVID, we can't. So we've been having different groups, national leaders with us that are in the workforce currently for GMR, and then we have other ones that are the field caregivers, and having the calls. And one of the things listening that I didn't realize that we know as an organization and what providers have to go through is the racism our crews end up running into. And if you're a Black employee and the racism a white patient has on that Black employee in Georgia, or vice versa, right? And we don't do a good job of training our new employees how to deal with racism with patients. Now, recognize we have probably racism problems within the organization ourselves, and we know the GMR page is all white people. It's all white, male, female, right? So we have no African American. So we recognize as an organization that's something we have to work on better on, and we have to deal with any issues we have within the workplace. But until you listen to the crews and realize we got to deal with training the crews and the employees so they can deal with patients that are racist against them, and how they deal with it. And it's you realize that if you don't listen as a leader, you don't realize that's actually something and you got to have an open communication with the workforce. And I usually really lean on Stars of Life because I love Stars of Life, and a lot of those Stars of Life, those employees, I continue communicating with afterwards. And to me, that's the passion that they have in that, and that's usually one of my major listening groups, because they didn't know they were getting selected for Stars, and here they are. And you hear the family stories and why they became a star. And it's not just because of saving someone and doing an amazing work as a caregiver. It's also who they are potentially within the community, and how they're good training and instructors. So it's such a wide background of stars. And, to me, that's also one of the main listening points for me. That's valuable, but you can't just isolate it to just that, having these broad groups. And I think employees now are also more open to doing video. And we're seeing, you don't necessarily need to get everything in person. You can just do the video time, and people are pretty open and able to communicate in this environment now and want to. So you can get some really good feedback that way. So as leaders, I think we all have to adapt. This has changed now. And how, I do a lot of the videos for the employees, especially during the disasters, to give them the updates, situational updates. And that's important, just for them to see your face and see your mannerisms, and how how a leader is passionate about employees and what you're doing. And you can do that one-on-one also in video time now that you can't get face-to-face. So as an organization, you have to adapt.
Right. And there's more of that coming. So I really appreciate you giving me the time and your energy today. I know you're a busy man, but I want to leave our audience and everybody who's taken the time to spend with us today a tip. If you could offer one piece of advice to emergent leaders, whatever that means to you, what is that thing that people need to be mindful of?
I think you have to have a passion for your belief, and you can't sweat the small stuff. So you want to recognize the small stuff matters. You can't sweat about it, but you can work on it. So, you all know okay, I got the big hurricane, the big disaster. We got to make sure that thing goes off. You don't want to, let go of something else that's important at that time. You got to put it aside potentially for a few minutes, but you don't want to ignore it and you want to get to it. But you have to make sure you, manage your time right. Otherwise, you're going to be overwhelmed with the tsunami. And it is a lot of stuff as a leader you have to do. Stay passionate about your beliefs and, make the personal time that you need to make sure you keep your head on straight. So.
Yeah. Well, great advice, Ted. And again, thank you for your time today. I appreciate you being with me.
Oh, thanks for having me on. It's great seeing you.
All right. Good to see you.